Leadership Preparation Webinar Series, 6 Components of Trauma-Informed School, Part 1. The Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement is comprised of an executive director reporting to the Assistant State Superintendent, coordinators for school improvement, academic improvement, and leadership development, as well as leadership specialists. Our office has 3 main goals: fostering the growth of effective leaders, ensuring valid and reliable evaluations, and raising the quality of education. We provide targeted professional learning experiences and resources to equip current and future leaders with the skills and knowledge required for successful school and district leadership. We oversee the development and implementation of Maryland's teacher and principal evaluation system. Training, guidance, and support is provided to local school systems in the implementation of fair and valid evaluations. Lastly, we provide customized professional learning experiences and support informed by data and grounded in effective practices to improve school performance. To earn continuing professional development credit, in order to receive 1 credit, you must view 5 webinars, including Part 1 and Part 2. Additionally, you will complete 3 hours of experiences per webinar to include pre-work, participant guides with the webinar, and extension activities. In order to receive 2 CPD credits, you must watch all the webinars in the series, including Part 1 and Part 2. Then you will complete 3 hours of experiences per webinar to include any pre-work, participant guides with the webinar, and extension activities. In order to submit your materials, please complete the Google form found in the description below the video. Let's meet the presenters. From the National Association of Secondary School Presenters, Harrison Bailey III and Nicholas Stomachalidis.
Our agenda is to cover the first part in this first session, and then the second part of our presentation in the second session. Our first part is looking at the definition of trauma. What is trauma? We are going to introduce this concept through a case study, defining trauma, and also defining toxic stress. In the second session, the focus is on what do we do about trauma? How do we approach it? We will identify critical components of a trauma-informed school, provide an implementation plan, and provide some helpful resources. Some logistics before we begin. First, you should have received some participant information in the form of a participation guide and also some reflection questions. Please utilize that guide along this presentation as something to refer to take notes in, and also to make sure that you fully understand the concepts as we present them. In addition to the participant guide and reflection questions, you'll have some additional resources for you to refer to. The ACEs survey, which we will talk about further in this presentation, and an example of a breathing exercise that is an activity that we recommend as part of the process in learning about trauma and how we deal with it. As I stated, this is a case study format, so we'll talk about it from the perspective of administrators running a school and how we work to transform schools to become more trauma-informed. And we also will supply to you our contact information so that if you have questions after the presentation further down the line, you can contact us and ask anything you'd like. You are going to be provided the link that is listed on this page as a way to locate some of these resources that we refer to as well. So let's begin. What is trauma? Today, our objectives. At the completion of part 1, as administrators, you'll be able to lead an assessment of your student culture. You should be able to identify trauma and toxic stress, discuss the adverse childhood experiences approach and its application to schools, and then finally to connect trauma to 6 of the professional standards of educational leaders: equity, support, professional capacity, professional community, family engagement, and school improvement. So the setting of our presentation is, as I stated, Liberty High School. Liberty High School is part of the Bethlehem Area School District in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And our setting is one in which we will use as the backdrop to talk about how we started the process of converting our school to becoming a trauma-informed school. First, this is now my 10th year at Liberty High School. And when I started at Liberty, you need to know some very key things about our district. 10 years ago, there had been high turnover in our district. So many different teachers and students who were moving in and out in terms of being furloughed, forced movements, retirements, those types of things. There was also a long-standing code of conduct, and that code of conduct was very punitive and very prescriptive. The perceptions at Liberty when I started were twofold. Students expressed that they truly loved their school. There were some very strong traditions here, an appreciation for diversity, some limited tolerance for disagreement and redirection from students, an inability to navigate confrontation, and then the belief that some staff truly cared about students and some didn't. From a staff perspective, there seemed to be a feeling of disconnect between the adults. There was definitely a heavy reliance on that code of conduct, which was prescriptive in nature. There was high anxiety and frustration among the adults in the building, problematic adult relationships. And the only way I can really describe this is the African proverb, when the elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. It was a time period in which there was a lot of infighting between adults, arguing within departments and between departments. So definitely some problematic issues between the adults. And then finally, some epidemic levels of student mental health challenges. So in January of 2017, I began with taking a very specific survey of our student body. And I wanted to know what were the things that they were truly struggling with as the principal. I needed to understand what the issues were for them. And so you can see in this slide what they identified, that the issues that they were facing personally, prejudice, drugs and alcohol, emotional abuse, poverty, mental illness, was witnessing violence. I'm sure these are things that as educators you've seen and you're familiar with. The others were issues that they believed existed within our city. And so they identified drug and alcohol abuse, prejudice, poverty, mental health issues, and emotional abuse. So the next thing we had to do is determine what were the issues around our mental health services. Who were our providers and how abundant were they? And we looked at this both from a local perspective and a national perspective to say, how bad was this issue? We found that there were 50% fewer psychiatrists in the Lehigh Valley, which is the area in which our school is located, than a decade ago. So 50% less than we had just a decade ago. We knew that there were 54,000 psychiatrists across the US, but only 8,300 of those were practicing child and adolescent psychiatrists in the US, and over 15 million youths needed one. So when you think about that particular statistic, if you applied it to these numbers, those psychiatrists would be looking at a caseload of 181 per psychiatrist. Per 100,000 people in the US, there's 10.5 psychiatrists, 60.3 social workers, and 29.8 psychologists. Well, with those numbers, by the year of 2025, there will be a therapy shortage in the US. 10,000 for family psychologists, 15,000 psychiatrists, 27,000 mental health counselors, 48,000 social workers, 57,000 psychologists, and 78,000 school counselors, according to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. So as you can see, mental health is going to be in a very precarious situation by 2025. It's already there now. We talk about it here at Liberty as the tidal wave that has hit the beach and no one knows it. So our next step back in December of 2017 was that we needed to identify the enemy. We needed to figure out what was this thing that we were dealing with. We knew at this point what our kids were dealing with in terms of the things they identified. We knew how our staff felt, but there was still this underlying feeling of something that we were struggling to deal with and identify. So in December of 2017, we put our heads together. We had a committee working, and identified some key factors. First, that there was a lack of progress with some students, even after considerable supports. So a lot was put in to try to help our students be successful, a lot of extra supports, a lot of additional things we did, and we still weren't seeing the progress that we felt we needed to and that our kids deserved. As I stated, there was a significant lack of mental health services, not just in our community, but nationwide. So we decided through conversation at that point, figured out that we were missing something. There was definitely a major component that we weren't addressing. And so I described this as the 3 legs on a 4-legged chair, right? And the description is this. Think about it as an educator, we're watching a student. The student sits in a chair that only has 3 legs. The chair falls over. So the kid gets up, they pick the chair up, they sit back down again, and what happens? Well, the chair falls over again. And so what do we do as educators? We stop that kid, and often what we do is we then take out the duct tape, and we start taping those 3 legs as tight as we can, and we fortify those 3 legs to make them as strong as possible. Well, after we do that, the kid sits down, and the chair still falls over. Well, that's what was happening at Liberty High School. We were fortifying those 3 legs as best we could, but weren't recognizing the issue, right? The issue was that there was a leg that was missing. So we decided something needed to change. We identified that trauma and toxic stress were the cause. They were the leg that was missing. So we developed an improvement plan with our district.
So as you heard all the information gathering, the intelligence gathering that Harrison was just sharing, as he spearheaded that with the team to figure out what our next steps ought to be, as typical as educational leaders that all of you who are viewing this are, and we always want to do something, but it was that critical nature of really taking hold of that information first. And then we were fortunate enough to come across, you see that title, How Childhood Trauma Affects Health Across a Lifetime, by Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, who's the first ever Surgeon General of California. Governor Newsom felt the importance of the health and wellness of students and young people in the state of California. And so this is a great starting point to truly start understanding about trauma and its effects. And so we're going to ask you as part of this training to view this outside, and you'll see some, as Harrison mentioned earlier, elements in your participation guide. But this is a little bit under 17-minute video, and not a word is wasted. That's a great intro for this critical and necessary work. So what is trauma? So trauma is when we've encountered an out of control and frightening experience that has disconnected us from all sense of safety, love, coping, and resourcefulness. And so a traumatic event can involve a single or repeated events that just overwhelm someone's ability to cope or even try to integrate ideas or emotions involved in that experience. And so basically, think of our central stress response system, our fight, flight, or freeze mechanism. Trauma affects the brain structure and the function of it. And so what's happening is, from these traumatic events, that cortisol and adrenaline, they wreak havoc from our brainstem into our bodies, and they take a tremendous toll on our bodies and minds. And so some examples of this would be type 2 diabetes, cancer, heart disease. They're not natural. I mean, they're caused by unwanted conditions of toxic stress. So let me bring this down to basically on the ground for educators. So the effects of trauma on the brain of a student. So a teacher in a classroom can reprimand a student in a way, perfectly appropriate, perfectly normal redirection, but yet the student receives that and perceives it as uncomfortable, which triggers them. And the neurobiological effect of what they're experiencing is really activating almost the sensation and the feelings of when you have an oncoming car coming right at you, speeding right at you, out of control. So it's that frightening, scary experience that is happening internally to our students, although on the exterior in the classroom, we may have observed a very fair and reasonable direction from a student to a teacher. So toxic stress, so what is it? Trauma can cause toxic stress. The impact of toxic stress on the brain and body, as I mentioned earlier, are very harmful. And yes, we do need a good amount of stress in order to grow, but all day long stress, each and every day, is extremely toxic. And we'll get into that a little bit later to truly understand what's the litmus test between stress, which helps us grow, and toxic stress. So people with toxic stress, as I mentioned earlier, they're experiencing multiple negative stressors without the resources to cope. So if you have someone to turn to talk to, friend support, then according to scientific beliefs, you're not experiencing toxic stress. Toxic stress is the prolonged activation, as I mentioned earlier, of our central response system. And so that fight, flight, freeze mechanism is going haywire and out of control in the absence of protective relationships. So you don't have a support or buffer. And so the consequences of toxic stress can be emotional and physical. It could be for a short period of time in your life. It could be long-term for some of our students. And they severely damage the personal hope levels. And one of the other resources we'll tell you at the end, they're all great resources, but some of these are just fantastic that you just have to view. In one of the videos, Resilience, we like how it says that the child may not remember. We do a good job of sometimes forgetting some of our pain from our past, especially when we're younger, but the body remembers and never forgets. So these ACEs cause a lot of unwanted illnesses. And they're even saying, as you'll learn about later about ACE scores shortly, that they're a stronger predictor of the risk of heart disease. So our ACE scores are a stronger predictor of heart disease than traditional risk factors, such as high cholesterol, high blood pressure, and smoking. So the link is indisputable and incredible. And so in this slide, you'll see some of the things that make up ACEs, some of our community challenges that Harrison mentioned earlier. And so when we talk about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, these are experiences prior to 18 years of age that have had a profound emotional or physical effect. And so the more ACEs you experience, the higher your chances of developing physical disease later on in life, as I mentioned earlier. And so the biggest problem with all this is not wanting to talk about it and working through it, which blocks your healing. So when ACEs first came out in the study, as you see there by Kaiser Permanente in the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention by Dr. Folletti and Dr. Anda, they realized overall on an average basis, when they have done these and we've replicated these studies beyond the original group, that we see in our society and culture, sadly, that 28% of individuals have been physically abused, 20% have been sexually abused, 13% have been on the receiving end of domestic abuse, and 27% of our population is engaged in substance abuse. So adversity, abuse, and neglect in our culture, when you see the 10 types of adversity in the ACE questionnaire later on, you'll clearly understand. And let me just say this, and later on you'll understand the importance of the hope levels. When you score an ACE score of 3 out of 10, you're twice as likely to have heart disease. An ACE score of 4 out of 10, you're 3 times as likely to suffer depression. And if you have an ACE score of 6 out of 10, you have a 20-year lower life expectancy. So when we talk about our students that have scored 4 or more out of the 10 ACE questions, they are 32% more likely to have learning, behavioral, and emotional problems in school than a student who had a 0. Pretty incredible information. And so what you have here is the original ACE study in the conventional ACEs that you see in the inner ring, the inner circle, if you will, on the abuse, on the neglect, and the household dysfunction. So this was the initial study by Kaiser Permanente on ACEs, and you'll see an outer ring of that, and the outer ring is the Philadelphia expanded study, which was conducted in 2012 and 2013. So you're looking at 15 years later, they wanted to study in this Philadelphia study about different challenges in this outer ring that happen in urban communities. So in the Philadelphia study, where roughly 25% of individuals live in poverty, 7 out of 10 students had experienced an ACE, and 2 in 5 had experienced 4 or more ACEs, which then, as you heard earlier, what type of impact that has on the learning and behavioral challenges of that student in the classroom. So pretty incredible that researchers found in the Philadelphia Expanded ACE study, the unique challenges that are created in an urban environment, that 40% of the participants, the students, had experienced 4 or more of these ACEs. So the effects of the national crises, the current challenges, are COVID-19 pandemic. So we know that nearly half of Americans currently are reporting that this pandemic is impacting, it's harming their mental health, according to a Kaiser Family Foundation poll. And we also know the current challenge of the racial unrest that's going on. The death of George Floyd sparked a wave of unrest throughout the country. and the challenges that are coming with that and with the burden that our young folks, our students and adults are carrying at the moment. And last but not least, the law enforcement practices that have spotlighted some of this and the current distrust of law enforcement due to practices and protocol that can be harmful to citizens. So all that to say that from a therapy standpoint, as you heard Harrison mention earlier, that there is this company by the name of Talkspace has reported a 65% increase, a jump in clients since mid-February on online therapy. So even our emergency hotlines for people in emotional distress, we're reporting a 1,000% increase. So these are some of the facts of the national crises that are currently and that are coming into our doorstep as educational leaders and for our staff who are on the front line working with our students today. So a summary of the first part that you will also be able to reinforce through the participants guide that we've offered is that children face significant life challenges. We also established that trauma is an out of control experience that disconnects us from all sense of safety, coping, love, and resourcefulness. Toxic stress, we've established that it's multiple negative stressors without the resources to cope. And you'll hear a lot more of this in the second part, which will greatly increase your hope levels. This could be a little bit tough information, but we have to establish the groundwork here. ACEs, as we mentioned that's the term for adverse childhood experiences. And so here's your homework. We'd like you to take the ACE survey after this session, and you'll be able to calculate where you stand, what exactly is your ACE score to better understand yourself and to better understand this critical work for a time such as this. And we also challenge you as part of your homework to watch the just under 17-minute amazing video clip by Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. So we thank you. And here's our personal information as you see our emails from myself and Harrison.
The Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement would like to thank you for participating in the Leadership Preparation virtual webinar series. We hope you found this particular webinar informative and beneficial to your work as you prepare as a leader. To access the webinar series and find additional resources, please visit the Maryland Resource Hub. The Maryland Resource Hub can be located at marylandresourcehub.com. That is MarylandResourcehub.com. We appreciate your feedback and would ask that you take a moment at this time to complete the SurveyMonkey link or use the QR code. The feedback that you provide to us will inform our work in the office as we develop additional resources to support you in the field. Again, thank you very much for your time in completing the feedback. As a reminder, the continuing professional development credits are available to you for this Leadership Preparation webinar series. To receive 1 credit, you will need to view 5 webinars, parts 1 and 2, and complete 3 hours of experience for the webinar. That would include the pre-work, viewing the webinar, and completing the participants guide, as well as extension activities related to the webinar. To receive 2 CPD credits, you will watch all 10 webinars, parts 1 and 2, and complete 3 hours of experience per webinar. Again, it would include the pre-work, viewing the webinar and completing the participants guide while watching, and extension activities related to the webinar. After you have completed the work, you will then submit all of the materials to the Google Form link listed. If you need to contact us with any questions for any reason at the Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement, you can contact Ed Mitzel, Executive Director, at edmund.mitzel@maryland.gov. That is edmund.mitzel@maryland.gov, or Dr. Lori Ellis, Coordinator for Leadership Development, at lori.ellis@maryland.gov. That is lori.ellis@maryland.gov.